From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I have been authorized by the Department of Justice to confirm that the FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election.
President Trump fires FBI Director James Comey just weeks after Comey confirmed the FBI is investigating Trump's ties to Russia before the 2016 election. Is this the beginning of another Watergate? Senate Democrats are calling for a special prosecutor.
If Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein does not appoint an independent special prosecutor, every American will rightly suspect that the decision to fire Director Comey was part of a cover-up.
We'll spend the hour speaking to Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept about the firing of Comey, the future of the FBI, and more. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey Tuesday, only weeks after Comey confirmed the FBI is investigating whether Trump's campaign collaborated with Russia to sway the 2016 election.
I have been authorized by the Department of Justice to confirm that the FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. And that includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts.
That was James Comey testifying to the House Intelligence Committee hearing in March. He was 4 years into a 10-year term when Trump fired him on Tuesday. Trump claims he made the decision based on the recommendation of newly appointed Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who both faulted Comey's handling of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails in the lead-up to the elections. The New York Times reports Sessions had been charged with coming up with reasons to fire Comey. In recent months, the FBI director had come under widespread criticism from many Democrats for notifying lawmakers just before the election that the FBI was once again investigating whether Clinton had sent classified information from her private email server while she was Secretary of State. Just last week, Clinton said Comey's actions factored into her loss. Still on Tuesday, dozens of Democrats spoke out against Comey's firing, saying they did not believe it was over his handling of the investigation into Clinton's emails. This is Virginia's Democratic Senator Mark Warner.
It's outrageous. I mean, I thought I could no longer be surprised by this administration. We'll cancel that out. I'm shocked by what the president did. I'm shocked as well by the idea that the Deputy Attorney General put his name to a letter that doesn't pass any smell test, somehow blaming Comey for his actions during the Clinton investigation as the reason for firing. That doesn't pass any smell test.
Many Senate Democrats are now calling for a special prosecutor to investigate the Trump administration. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer defended Trump's move to fire Comey.
I also find it interesting that the same individuals who are out there making these statements on the other side of the aisle are the same people, including the minority leader, who said very clearly just a few months ago, I have lost confidence in the attorney and in the FBI director. So the same people from Nancy Pelosi to Chuck Schumer and Adam Schiff over and over again questioned his ability to effectively lead the FBI. And it seems a bit ironic that they are now sort of questioning the president's decision to side with something that they clearly articulated a few months back.
This morning, President Trump tweeted, Comey lost the confidence of almost everyone in Washington, Republican and Democrat alike. When things calm down, they'll be thanking me, he said. Comey's firing came on the same day CNN reported federal prosecutors have issued grand jury subpoenas to associates of Trump's former national security advisor, General Mike Flynn, as part of the ongoing probe of alleged Russian meddling in last year's election. We'll have more on Trump's decision to fire FBI Director James Comey after headlines with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald. President Trump is meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at the White House today. Among the topics of conversation will be the ongoing conflict in Syria. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer spoke about Trump's arming of the Kurdish People's Protection Units, known as the YPG, which are part of the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces fighting ISIS.
Yesterday, the president authorized the Department of Defense to equip Kurdish elements of the Syrian Democratic Forces as necessary to ensure a clear victory over ISIS in Raqqa, Syria. The SDF, partnered with enabling support from U.S. and coalition forces, are the only force on the ground that successfully seize Raqqa in the near future.
The U.S. also backed the YPG under President Obama. After meeting with President Trump, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will head to the Arctic, where he'll also meet with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. The Department of Energy has declared a state of emergency at the Hanford nuclear site in Washington state after a tunnel storing contaminated radioactive materials collapsed, forcing hundreds of workers to take cover to avoid potential exposure. Hanford's the nation's most polluted nuclear weapons production site. The site's been leaking radioactive waste on and off for years. The Energy Department claims no radioactive contamination has been reported so far from Tuesday's tunnel collapse. But Edwin Lyman from the Union of Concerned Scientists said, quote, collapse of the earth covering the tunnels could lead to a considerable radiological release, unquote. We'll be reporting from Washington state tomorrow on Democracy Now! In South Korea, voters elected human rights lawyer Moon Jae-in to be the next president. Moon Jae-in has pledged to challenge the THAAD missile defense system the U.S. recently installed in South Korea and to open talks with North Korea. His election comes after former President Park Geun-hye was ousted and jailed on charges of bribery, extortion, and abuse of power after massive street demonstrations in March. In Florida, at least 3 people were arrested when passengers staged a revolt at the Fort Lauderdale airport Monday after Spirit Airlines canceled 9 flights, stranding hundreds of people. Spirit canceled the flights in part because the airline company is also facing resistance from its pilots over poor working conditions, low pay, lack of profit sharing, and the company's attempts to slow down contract negotiations. The latest cancellations came after hundreds of Spirit's flights were canceled. In New York City, hundreds of people protested House Speaker Paul Ryan's visit to a Harlem charter school Tuesday. The protesters were demonstrating against Congressman Ryan's health care plan, which would strip health care from millions of Americans, and his backing of charter school companies such as Success Academy, which operates the Harlem School and 33 other schools across New York City. This is one of the protesters, community activist Dr. Wilhelmina Perry.
I'm Dr. Wilhelmina Perry, and I'm a community activist, and I represent LGBT faith leaders of African descent. I'm here because I object to the policies that are regressive of this administration, and I believe that Ryan and DeVos ought not to be able to come to Harlem and find that we are accepting, we are protesting against their being here.
The Council on American Islamic Relations says Islamophobic attacks surged by 57% in 2016. The attacks include mosques being set on fire, Muslim women being assaulted on the street and having their headscarves ripped off of them, and Muslims being illegally targeted for interrogation by the FBI and other state agencies. CARE says the rise in hate crimes against Muslims in the U.S. was fueled in part by President Trump's campaign rhetoric and his appointment of Islamophobes to top cabinet and White House positions. A new report has called into question whether President Trump would have actually won Wisconsin during the 2016 presidential election without the state's strict voter ID law. The study published by the progressive advocacy group Priorities USA says the law suppressed the votes of more than 200,000 residents, the majority of whom were African American and Democratic-leaning. President Trump won only 22,748 more votes than Hillary Clinton in Wisconsin. In economic news, a new report by the AFL-CIO says CEOs of the biggest U.S. companies are paying themselves on average 347 times more than the average U.S. worker earns in a year. The CEOs paid themselves an average of $13.1 million in 2016. In Ohio, the Environmental Protection Agency has fined Energy Transfer Partners, the company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline, $400,000 for spilling millions of gallons of drilling chemicals and fluids onto the land amidst construction of another pipeline, the $4.2 billion Gas Rover pipeline, which is slated to stretch from Appalachia to Ontario, Canada. There have been at least 18 spills, including one of up to 5 million gallons of fluids that's contaminated a previously pristine wetland. Ohio EPA Director Craig Butler said this spill will, quote, kill just about everything in that wetland, unquote. Officials are currently trying to clean up the chemicals with a vacuum and by hand. This comes as Bloomberg News reports oil is slated to begin flowing through the Dakota Access Pipeline on May 14th. The pipeline faced months of resistance from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, hundreds of other indigenous nations and other allies over concerns a pipeline spill could contaminate the Missouri River, a drinking source for over 10 million people. The North Dakota Department of Health says there have been more than 700 oil and gas-related spills in last year alone, or a spill every 11 hours and 45 minutes on average. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Washington, 26 activists were arrested Monday as they temporarily shut down 14 different J.P. Morgan Chase branches across the city to demand the bank refuse to do business with TransCanada, the company behind the Keystone XL pipeline, which President Trump has promised to revive. Imprisoned Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning will be freed next week. In 2013, Manning was sentenced to 35 years in prison for leaking more than 700,000 classified files and videos to WikiLeaks about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and U.S. foreign policy. In January, the White House said she would be released on May 17th after President Obama commuted her sentence. On Tuesday, Chelsea Manning released a statement saying, quote, "For the first time, I can see a future for myself as Chelsea. I can imagine surviving and living as the person who I am and can finally be in the outside world. Freedom used to be something that I dreamed of but never allowed myself to fully imagine," she said. Her attorneys say she's already the longest-held whistleblower in U.S. history. In New Jersey, undocumented activist and student Karameh Andujar walked out of an ICE check-in on Tuesday and celebrated with more than 100 supporters who gathered outside the immigration office to protest her possible deportation. Karameh is in her third year studying chemical engineering at Rutgers University, where she's the president of Undocu Rutgers. She was waiting for renewal of her DACA status, which gives her permission to live, work, and study in the United States, when she received a letter from ICE ordering her to report for the check-in on Tuesday. This is Karameh Andujar speaking to her supporters after she walked freely out of the ICE office in Newark, New Jersey.
Let me remind you of the power that you guys have. The 45th might be our president, but the people's power will always be stronger than the people in power.
In West Virginia, journalist Dan Heyman of Public News Service was arrested after he repeatedly asked Health and Human Services Secretary Dr. Tom Price whether domestic violence would be categorized as a pre-existing condition under the Republicans' new health care plan. The Republicans' plan does not protect people with pre-existing conditions, instead allowing insurance companies to charge them dramatically higher rates for health insurance. Heyman was arrested, jailed on $5,000 bail, and charged with willful disruption of state government processes after he repeatedly questioned Price in the hallway of the West Virginia state capitol. The American Civil Liberties Union has issued a travel alert warning potential travelers to Texas they might be illegally stopped by police and asked about their immigration status now that Texas Governor Greg Abbott has signed into law SB 4, one of the harshest anti-immigrant laws in the country. The law bans sanctuary cities and allows police officers to check the immigration status of anyone they detain. To see our full interview about SB 4 with Austin City Council member Gregorio Casar, who was recently arrested at a sit-in at Abbott's office protesting SB 4, go to DemocracyNow.org. Meanwhile, the Homeland Security Department has admitted it's been compiling lists of alleged crimes committed by Haitians who received temporary protected status, or TPS, to legally reside and work in the U.S. after an earthquake devastated Haiti in 2010. Up to 55,000 Haitians could be forcefully repatriated to Haiti if the Trump administration refuses to extend the protected status on July 22nd. To see our full interview with Marlene Bastien, Executive Director of Haitian Women of Miami, go to DemocracyNow.org. And in Ferguson, Missouri, family members and activists are mourning the death of 27-year-old Edward Crawford, a father of 4 young children who took part in the 2014 Ferguson uprising sparked by the police killing of unarmed African-American teenager Michael Brown. Crawford was the subject of an iconic photo in which he's throwing a police tear gas canister away from a group of protesters before it could explode. Missouri State Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal tweeted, quote, "Edward Crawford is dead, found in his car shot to death. He's Ferguson's hero. For those of us tear-gassed, he was our local champion. R.I.P." unquote. Crawford died in his car from a gunshot wound on Thursday. His father has rejected the police initial claims that the death was a suicide. He's the 3rd Ferguson protester to have been found shot dead inside their own cars since the uprising. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. President Trump has set off a political firestorm after firing FBI Director James Comey just weeks after Comey confirmed the FBI was investigating whether Trump's campaign collaborated with Russia to sway the 2016 election. Comey was 4 years into a 10-year term. The firing came on the same day that CNN reported federal prosecutors have issued grand jury subpoenas to associates of Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, as part of the ongoing probe of Russian meddling in last year's election. This all comes as President Trump prepares to meet with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at the White House today. It's Lavrov's first visit to Washington since 2013. The firing of James Comey has led dozens of Senate Democrats to call for a special prosecutor to investigate the Trump administration.
President Trump said he made the decision based on the recommendation of newly appointed Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who both faulted Comey's handling of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server. Rosenstein faulted Comey's remarks last July when he announced the FBI would not seek charges against Clinton. The New York Times reports Attorney General Sessions had been charged with coming up with reasons to fire Comey. Democratic Senator Al Franken and others slammed Sessions for participating in Comey's firing after recusing himself from the Russia investigation. Senator Franken said, quote, "This is a complete betrayal of his commitment to the public that he wouldn't be involved in the investigation," unquote. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer defended Trump's firing of Comey.
I also find it interesting that the same individuals who are out there making these statements on the other side of the aisle are the same people, including the minority leader, who said very clearly just a few months ago, "I have lost confidence in the attorney and in the FBI director." So the same people from Nancy Pelosi to Chuck Schumer and Adam Schiff over and over again questioned his ability to effectively lead the FBI. And it seems a bit ironic that they are now sort of questioning the president's decision to side with something that they clearly articulated a few months back.
This morning, Donald Trump tweeted, "Comey lost the confidence of almost everyone in Washington, Republican and Democrat alike. When things calm down, they'll be thanking me." In recent months, Comey had come under widespread criticism from many Democrats for notifying lawmakers just before the election that the FBI was once again investigating whether Clinton had sent classified information from her private email server while she was Secretary of State. Just last week, Clinton said Comey's actions factored into her loss.
But on Tuesday, several of Clinton's closest aides slammed Trump's decision to fire Comey. Clinton's former campaign manager, Robbie Mook, wrote on Twitter, "Twilight Zone, I was as disappointed and frustrated as anyone at how the email investigation was handled, but this terrifies me," he said. Well, to talk more about the firing of the FBI director, James Comey, the future of the FBI, and more, we're joined by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald, co-founder of The Intercept. Hi, Glenn. Thanks so much for being with us. It's great to have you live in our studio here in New York. Your response to President Trump firing James Comey.
So in the 100-plus short days of the Trump administration, I think there have been many things Donald Trump has done that have been menacing and even heinous. But I actually don't think there are many things that he has done that you could say were shocking, given the things he promised to do during the campaign, as well as who he revealed himself to be, both during the campaign and in the decades preceding that. This, however, is the only word you can think of for it, is shocking. Aside from the fact how rare it is for presidents to fire FBI directors, it's something that's typically tolerated only under the most extreme circumstances when there are serious ethical issues that have arisen about the director's behavior. For him to do this just 2 weeks after Comey made huge news by announcing that he was overseeing a criminal investigation into the Trump campaign's potential collusion with Russia, on top of which there have been very recent developments in that case of subpoenas being issued to close Trump aides. It is incredibly, it's just stunning that they would be so indifferent to the obvious appearance that this is about nothing more than Trump directly interfering into an investigation targeting him by removing the person spearheading it. I think what's even more amazing is the rationale that they concocted in order to justify this, because of course they needed to come up with a reason beyond we're firing Comey because we're concerned about the investigation aimed at Trump. So for them to raise these criticisms of Comey that were actually widespread, including among many Democrats, 6 months ago when it actually happened, namely that Comey took it upon himself to make the decision about terminating Hillary Clinton's criminal investigation because he thought Loretta Lynch couldn't do it, and even more so that Comey stood up and didn't just say we're ending the investigation, but said, here are all the reasons why Hillary Clinton did awful things. To pretend that that's what offends them is such an insult to everyone's intelligence that it raises the real question about what is the actual reason.
So let's go back to October 2016, when Trump was on the campaign trail and said Comey had guts for his handling of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server.
And I have to give the FBI credit. That was so bad what happened originally, and it took guts for Director Comey to make the move that he made in light of the kind of opposition he had, where they're trying to protect her from criminal prosecution. You know that. It took a lot of guts. I really disagreed with him. I was not his fan. But I'll tell you what he did, he brought back his reputation. He brought it back. He's got to hang tough, because there's a lot of people want him to do the wrong thing. What he did was the right thing.
So that's Trump speaking last year, October 2016, on the campaign trail. Now, in Trump's letter to Comey, he wrote, quote, "While I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I'm not under investigation, I nevertheless concur with the judgment of the Department of Justice that you are not able to effectively lead the Bureau." Now, White House officials refused to say anything more about these 3 separate occasions Trump cited in the letter. Republican Representative Justin Amash took to Twitter saying Trump's claim was, quote, bizarre, and calling for an independent commission to investigate Trump's link to Russia. He tweeted, quote, "My staff and I are reviewing legislation to establish an independent commission on Russia. The second paragraph of this letter is bizarre." Republican Senator Jeff Flake tweeted, quote, "I've spent the last several hours trying to find an acceptable rationale for the timing of Comey's firing. I just can't do it. So Glenn Greenwald, can you talk about what Trump was saying in October 2016 and what he said in the letter?
Certainly. So that clip that we just watched was, as you said, from October, and he was praising Comey for having sent that last-minute letter to Congress announcing the reopening of the investigation. That doesn't seem to be the reason they're pretending to have fired Trump. They're pretending to have fired Trump because what they're angry about is
fired
Comey, excuse me, is the press conference that Comey held in which he stood up and announced that the criminal investigation of Hillary Clinton was coming to an end. But then he did something extraordinary for an FBI director, right, back in July, which was he didn't just say we're ending the criminal investigation. He then went on to opine on her conduct, which is what you don't want an FBI director ever to do, because
he said it was careless.
He said he was careless and reckless and things. He gave about 15 minutes of very harsh criticism. And the reason why that's so disturbing, genuinely, is because you don't want an FBI investigator essentially trying somebody in public but not charging them. The problem, though, is that Donald Trump loved those comments. In fact, I think the only thing that he quoted during the campaign, more than the Bible, was that Jim Comey speech. And so now to turn around 6 months later and say we're firing him for the remarks that we actually loved him making at the time. Jeff Sessions loved it. They all loved it. That's what I think people are finding so difficult to swallow.
And of course, I mean, right through to the inauguration, right through to the confirmation speech of the Republican convention, he would make statements leading to that chorus of jail her, jail her. And now, right after James Comey confirms he's investigating the Trump administration, this is when this firing comes down. That speech that you're talking about was in July. Why didn't he fire her? Why didn't he fire James Comey the day after the inauguration?
And why weren't Republicans like Jeff Sessions criticizing Comey for the public comments that he made about Hillary Clinton? There was a debate at the time where Democrats were saying what Comey said was inappropriate, but Republicans largely were saying what Comey said was necessary and important to inform the public. And so I think that because nobody believes there's any plausibility to this rationale, it's clear what happened here.
We're going to break. We're going to break and then come back to our discussion with the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald, founding editor, one of the founding editors of The Intercept. His latest piece, Trump's support and praise of despots, is central to the U.S. tradition, not a deviation from it. This is Democracy Now! Donald Trump has fired James Comey. We'll keep discussing it. Stay with us.
Look at all these rumors surrounding me every day. I just need some time to get away from all these rumors. I can't take it no more. My best friend said there's one out now about me and the girl next door. I can't go no place without somebody pointing a finger. I can't show my face 'cause when it comes to rumors, I'm a dead ringer. It seems from rumors I just can't get away. I bet there'll even be rumors floating around on Judgment Day. I think I'll write my congressman and tell him to pass a bill, so the next time they catch somebody starting rumors, shoot to kill. When you look at all these rumors surrounding me every day, I just need some time to get away from all these rumors. Can't take it no more. My best friend said there's one out now about me and the girl next door.
Rumors, Timex Social Club here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
President Trump has set off a political firestorm after firing FBI Director James Comey just weeks after Comey confirmed the FBI was investigating whether Trump's campaign collaborated with Russia to sway the 2016 election. On Tuesday, Senator Chuck Schumer reiterated his call for the Department of Justice to appoint a special prosecutor for the probe into the 2016 election, saying failure to do so would rightly make the American public believe there had been a cover-up in Comey's firing.
The only way the American people can have faith in this investigation is for it to be led by a fearless, independent special prosecutor. If Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein does not appoint an independent special prosecutor, every American will rightly suspect that the decision to fire Director Comey was part of a cover-up.
So that's Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer speaking Tuesday after news of Comey's firing came out. Meanwhile, in an interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper Tuesday night, White House counselor Kellyanne Conway disputed the claim that Trump and his White House are under investigation by the FBI.
Clearly, this White House is under investigation. The people around the president, are under investigation. You would agree with that, yes?
No, I don't. I know that some are obsessed
you don't
with
believe,
the word
James
Russia,
Comey
Russia.
said that there is an ongoing investigation.
The president is not under investigation. I'm around the president. I'm not under investigation. I can name many people in that same situation, but I know everybody wants to.
So you're saying there is no investigation by the FBI that's ongoing right now into the people around the president of the United States?
I'm saying that, well, I don't know that, but I'm saying that to the extent that any of that is true, the president himself is not the subject of investigation.
So that's White House counselor Kellyanne Conway speaking last night to CNN's Anderson Cooper. So, Glenn Greenwald, can you respond to that? And also, again, Trump saying in his letter that he was assured by Comey on three separate occasions that he was not under investigation.
So first, just on the quickly on the Chuck Schumer comment, I think it's unlikely the most extreme theory that Comey's firing was due to some desire to suppress some kind of smoking gun evidence that the FBI was on the verge of discovering, because obviously if there was such evidence, many people besides Jim Comey would know about it. There's still career justice investigators who are continuing to look into this. Getting rid of James Comey would not silence him. But I think the broader point is the correct one, which is that what Trump wants is to make sure there's a loyalist to him directing the FBI, as opposed to somebody who prides himself on being independent. As far as Kellyanne Conway is concerned, she's a lawyer. I think she's using very legalistic terms there to talk about who is a formal target of this investigation. But according to Jim Comey, it's the Trump campaign itself, along with individuals like Carter Page and Paul Manafort and Roger Stone and others, who are the specific targets of the investigation. So whether Donald Trump, the individual, is a formal target of the criminal investigation makes no difference, given that it is his campaign and now people close to his White House who are part of and targets of this investigation.
And given on the same day that Trump fires Comey, CNN reports federal prosecutors have issued grand jury subpoenas to associates of Trump's former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn as part of their ongoing probe into the alleged Russian meddling in the election. You're a constitutional lawyer as well as a reporter, Glenn. So the significance of this, and also Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, weighing in here when he explicitly recused himself. Let's go to that moment in March when Attorney General Jeff Sessions said he would recuse himself from any investigations into alleged Russian meddling in the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
My staff recommended recusal. They said that since I had involvement with the campaign, I should not be involved in any campaign investigation. I have studied the rules and considered their comments and evaluation. I believe those recommendations are right and just. Therefore, I have recused myself in the matters that deal with the Trump campaign. The exact language of that recusal is in the press release that we will give to you. I've said this, quote, I have now decided to recuse myself from any existing or future investigations of any matter relating in any way to the campaigns for President of the United States.
So this is really stunning, Glenn. I mean, reportedly at the time, Trump was furious that Sessions was recusing himself. And now, though, he hardly has recused himself. I mean, they're saying this came from Rosenstein. He's been there for a few weeks, and this entire memo that came up with a justification for Trump firing Comey, clearly instigated by Trump asking for this rationale.
Even if the impetus for it was Rosenstein, they are admitting that Sessions himself formally endorsed the letter. And I suppose their excuse is that because this firing wasn't about the Russia investigation, but instead was about the email investigation, this is consistent with Sessions's promised to recuse himself from all matters regarding Russia. But of course, removing the FBI director has a major impact on the very investigation that Jeff Sessions promised to recuse himself from all matters concerning, which is this Trump-Russia investigation. Let me just add, I've been one of the people who've been urging skepticism on the question of Russia and Trump and collusion and even the broader Russia questions, and I still do. But my position has always been from the very beginning, given how significant these questions are, it is in everybody's interest, if you're somebody who believes Trump is a Kremlin puppet, to believing that this is just a Democratic conspiracy to avoid self-critique, to everything in between, it is in everybody's interest to have an investigation that at the end, no matter what the outcome, everyone says, I may not agree with all the conclusions, but this was a fair investigation. And what just happened in the last 24 hours makes that utterly impossible, which is why I think the reaction should be, besides an investigation into the fire of Comey, let us construct an actual, independent, empowered body that can truly and finally get to the bottom of these questions.
Well, in a piece in January for The Intercept, you wrote, quote, in the wake of President Donald Trump's inauguration, the FBI assumes an importance and influence it has not wielded since J. Edgar Hoover's death in 1972. Now, you wrote this in January, and here we are with Trump having fired the FBI director, and he's now in a position to appoint whomever he wants. So what does that mean for the power of the FBI?
Yeah, that story was actually in conjunction with a major leak that we were able to publish about these powers of the FBI, these vast, far-reaching domestic powers that very few people knew about. And we highlighted the importance of it by saying exactly that, namely that the FBI played a really important role in the 2016 election. They continually leaked the parts of the New York office that are close to Rudy Giuliani and were supporting Trump, information designed to damage Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump loves law enforcement agencies and clearly wanted to empower the FBI. And what this is, because of exactly that, is a takeover of one of the most powerful agencies when it comes to the right to dissent, political activism in the United States, and the ability to apply the rule of law equally. So as someone who has tried to tamp down a lot of the overreaction to a lot of Trump's stories, this is one where I'm fully on board in believing that its importance can't be overstated, primarily for the reason that you just referenced.
On Tuesday, NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden tweeted, "This FBI director has sought for years to jail me on account of my political activities. If I can oppose his firing, so can you." And set aside politics. Every American should condemn such political interference in the Bureau's work. I mean, this is pretty stunning. This is Edward Snowden, who Comey, as he said, has been trying to jail for years. And he says, if I can oppose this firing, so can you.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Comey has not only tried to do everything possible to put Edward Snowden into a prison cell for 40 years, he has denounced him as a traitor, he has called him a criminal and a felon, devoted huge amounts of resources to securing his apprehension. And I think what Snowden is trying to encourage people to do there is to say, look, we all have very strong opinions, even vested interests, but there are times as Americans when we say there are certain lines that we won't allow to be crossed, and firing the FBI director in order to influence criminal investigations directed at the White House has to be one of those lines.
Maine Senator Angus King, an independent, who serves on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, said he came up with an idea last night. He said, why don't we hire James Comey to lead the investigation for us in the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence? He's now a free man to do whatever he wants to do. Now, this is a very interesting proposal.
Right. Well, this is what I was getting at earlier, right, is the idea that the objective here was to suppress some smoking gun evidence by getting rid of Jim Comey makes no sense, even to the Trump White House. If anything, you'd make it more likely that it would surface through a scheme like this or through Jim Comey simply leaking it. But what I do think is interesting about Jim Comey is that over the last 12 months, there probably is nobody more hated in Washington, first by the Democrats, first by the Republicans, then by the Democrats, and now again by the Republicans. And in some sense, that is the kind of person that you want leading an investigation like this, somebody who genuinely feels no fealty to any faction or any political party, and who everyone knows that's the case. I think that's an ingenious idea.
Well, former Democratic presidential candidate, as you mentioned, both Democrats and Republicans are not terribly fond of Comey. Hillary Clinton claimed that FBI Director Comey and Russian hacking cost her the U.S. election during an interview last week.
I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off. If the election had been on October 27th, I'd be your president.
So that's former Democratic presidential contender Hillary Clinton speaking last week. Glenn, your comments.
Well, the election was not on October 27th. The election was in November. And I think that one of the important points to underscore about what she said there, and there you could do a whole show just on that little snippet, and I'd probably be overjoyed to do it. But just to focus on one point about it, it isn't just that the Democrats lost this election despite outspending Donald Trump 2-1, despite facing the most unpopular political candidate in history, somebody who broke every norm. The Democrats across the board, and I think this is so important when we think about how to oppose Donald Trump, have collapsed as a political force in the United States. They're the minority in the House and Congress. They have lost huge numbers of governorships and state houses under President Obama. Obama was a successful president, but the Democratic Party underneath him has completely collapsed. And you would think and hope that when we think about how to stop this movement of white nationalism and extreme nationalism, that we think about how to fix the Democratic Party, how to fix the problems with its messaging and its inability to reach voters and the perception that it only serves the interest of corporate donors. So when you have Hillary Clinton constantly shifting the focus and blaming everything else and everyone else besides herself and her own party for this defeat, I think it's incredibly counterproductive to the principal task that lies in front of all of us, which is to figure out how we're going to construct a viable alternative to the political movement in the United States that is ascendant right now.
So you have, Glenn, this remarkable chronology. You have the Comey speech in July that President Trump hailed at the time right through the election. Well, he hailed the fact that Comey was investigating Hillary Clinton. He doesn't fire him when he comes into office. A.G. Sessions recuses himself for any investigations, being involved in any investigations to do with Trump and Russia. And then you have the firing, which Sessions also pushes. At this point, the question among them is who will Donald Trump replace James Comey with? James Comey's supposed to testify tomorrow in Congress. Could he still testify? Do you think that this is equivalent to or the beginning of a new Watergate? You had Nixon, who fired the special prosecutor, not the FBI director, but it's extremely significant.
Extremely significant. I mean, there are parallels, certainly, that you can draw with the Saturday Night Massacre when Nixon ordered the firing of the special prosecutor. It was a little bit different there because it was an actual special prosecutor focused exclusively on those Watergate investigations. And remember, Watergate did not really become a first-rate political scandal that threatened the Trump administration until there started emerging evidence of actual wrongdoing, of underlying criminality, which, to this day, I think it's important to note, we still don't have.
And remember, that Nixon re-election, he won by a landslide.
And Watergate really was not a significant issue in the outcome of the voting for exactly that reason, which is people hadn't seen evidence of the underlying criminality. We do not yet have evidence, and it may not exist or it might exist, that the Trump campaign, meaning not Carter Page, but people high up in the Trump campaign, colluded with the Russians to hack into the DNC or John Podesta's email. James Clapper, Obama's national security official, has said he's never seen any such evidence during his time in government. Dianne Feinstein, just last week on CNN, after she got back from a CIA briefing, was asked by Wolf Blitzer if she is aware of any such evidence, and she said, she isn't. And so
Clapper also said he wasn't aware that the FBI was investigating the Trump administration.
Right, but he's still the national security official and has said you would think if there were intercepts, if there were sensitive national security information showing it. So it's not dispositive. You're absolutely right. It's just that as the public, we haven't yet seen that evidence. And that's the evidence that we need to see for, I think, this to really escalate into a scandal that threatens the Trump presidency. But obviously, the firing of Comey raises the specter that he must perceive something significant at stake in order to fire Comey. Maybe he just wanted a loyalist in the FBI. Maybe he just doesn't like Comey. That is the kind of impetuous decision-making Trump is known for. But it certainly seems like this was a concerted effort to remove Jim Comey, knowing it would create a political scandal. There must be a good reason for that.
So we're going to break. When we come back, you talked about, well, who could he choose? I mean, names are being floated, like the former mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, like the governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, and others. Glenn Greenwald is with us, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, founding editor of The Intercept. We'll be back in a minute. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
NBC is reporting this morning, House Oversight Ranking Member Elijah Cummings has called for emergency hearings with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, Deputy AG Ron Rosenstein, and FBI Director Comey. So, Glenn, can you say what the significance of that meeting might be, and also the speculation by some that this is really the beginning of the end of Trump's presidency?
Well, this is what we were getting at earlier, which is if you're the Trump administration and you really believe that Jim Comey has access to incriminating evidence, on some level, the last thing you would want to do is so publicly fire him, especially in the most humiliating manner possible, not notify him, not tell him. Right.
He was briefing people in the L.A. office, I think. It was on TV.
He learned it from TV. So they fired him in the most humiliating, vindictive manner possible. You could not have converted somebody into an enemy more reliably than what they did. And I think a lot of people would agree in Washington, Comey is a very shrewd operator. He knows how to stick knives into people's backs without his fingerprint. The last person you want as an enemy, freelancing against you, is Jim Comey. So I think there's going to be all kinds of really fascinating developments now that Comey is freed from what had been this kind of stifling role as FBI director, where you really couldn't speak publicly about much of anything.
And why didn't Trump tell even senior White House officials that he was intending to do this?
So I think one of the most difficult tasks literally on the planet is to try and divine the thinking of the Trump White House. You never know the ratio of malice versus ineptitude. They're so inept as a staff. It could just be they have no idea how to do anything, or it could be the way they did it to Mitt Romney. They wanted to humiliate him in as public of a manner as possible.
So Donald Trump fires the FBI director. Many say it's because he is investigating, and he did just recently say he was investigating the Trump White House and possible collusion with Russia around the elections. And today, President Trump is meeting with the Russian foreign minister in the White House, with Lavrov.
So I think, this is, as a journalist and as kind of a citizen, this is part of what has bothered me about this whole scandal from the beginning. And I think Noam Chomsky was on your show maybe last week or the week before and made this point very well, which is Unfortunately, what this scandal has done is it has taken what ought to be an aspiration that we all share as Americans, which is to find a way to improve relations with this incredibly powerful nuclear-armed state with whom we have a history of decades of animosity, with whom we've almost come to civil war, to nuclear war, and hope that we can and look at better relations not as as indicia of disloyalty or treason, but as something that we all ought to support. And unfortunately, what this scandal has done is it has pressured Trump to prove that he's not a lackey of the Kremlin by ratcheting up tensions between Moscow and Washington. And I think that people are telling the truth when they say relations between the two countries are as low as they've been in many years, maybe since the Cold War. So we ought not to let these legitimate questions surrounding Comey and Russia and interference in the election turn into something nefarious and sinister efforts to have normal diplomatic relations between the United States and Russia. We still ought to encourage that.
Well, I mean, Trump's, as you've pointed out earlier, Trump's sacking of Comey will obviously lead to greater speculation, if not confirmation, that Russia was involved in some way in the 2016 election in supporting Trump.
And that Trump decided that the huge firestorm that would happen now was worth the trade-off, because what he didn't want to happen was him getting at the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the obvious perception, that even if you're trying to wear a lens of thick skepticism through which you're viewing these events, you have to take into account. But on the other hand, I still think that it's an extremely dangerous situation when you have two countries like the United States and Russia drowning in a nuclear-armed arsenal, to have it be politically radioactive on both sides, to be able to have constructive relations. And so I think it's imperative that we keep these two things separate.
So let's talk about the possible replacements for the FBI director. For example, Rudolph Giuliani. For example, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie.
So I think that, obviously the reason why the firing of Comey is so controversial, even among Republicans, among pretty much everybody, is because it creates the perception that the FBI has lost its independence. So the last thing that Trump can do to tamp down that perception is to appoint somebody who's viewed as his lackey. And there is no more craven, principle-free, corrupt prosecutor that you can think of in the country that Trump could appoint other than Rudy Giuliani, except perhaps for Chris Christie. Those two are probably the worst possible selections that Trump could make in order to put in charge of the FBI. And I think if he did that, you would start to see a lot more defections, even among Republicans, who would start to view this as a bridge way too far.
Well, Republicans have already criticized him for firing Comey in the first place. But do you think, to go back to my question earlier, that this could be the beginning of the end of Trump's presidency?
So if you study the Watergate investigation, as you alluded to earlier, it began with these lies and these maneuverings that were about a cover-up. But no one really knew what was being covered up, about who knew about the burglary, who had actually planned it. What they knew is that there was lying to Congress, there was an attempt to suppress information. But it wasn't until evidence of the underlying crime emerged that it really began to threaten the Nixon presidency. That's what I think has to happen here for this scandal to take the next step. There's been lying by the Trump administration, efforts to obfuscate. This is a huge escalation of those efforts. But until we actually see evidence of collusion, of underlying criminality between Trump and Russia, I don't think it'll threaten his presidency in the sense that it could cause impeachment, but it certainly will continue to impede his ability to do things and perhaps even cripple his presidency.
Other people mentioned were Ray Kelly, the former police chief of New York, David Clark, the former police chief of Milwaukee. But then there is the discussion of the current Andrew McCabe, acting director of the FBI, who was chosen by James Comey in 2016, has now assumed duties and apparently was meeting with the White House.
Yeah, I mean, remember, the person who appointed James Comey to be the FBI director, notwithstanding his longtime Republican service, including in the Bush administration, was Barack Obama. There's a tradition of showing that you want to put independent people in the FBI director, and I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Trump, even from Republicans, not to make an appointment that takes this event from humiliating to something even worse.
And what you say to those who say, I mean, the people who are doing the investigation at the FBI will still keep doing it.
Right. So there are career investigators at Justice and at the FBI, and that's why I say there's no way to fire Comey as a means of suppressing incriminating information. But it's also true that who leads the FBI, especially under the direction of Jeff Sessions, notwithstanding his recusal, as we've just seen, those top officials can hamstring investigations, they can deprive them of resources, they can redirect them in all kinds of ways that we ought to regard as undesirable.
What about your reporting on the FBI secret rules, what you've started talking about? President Trump inheriting this vast domestic intelligence agency with extraordinary powers. I mean, even as he was putting out the lie that President Obama wiretapped him at Trump Tower, they signed off on a law that would increase the surveillance power of the government. And then you go back to this leak that led to you finding so much about previous FBIs.
It's funny, as someone who's worked on civil liberties as a journalist since the Bush era, the argument I used to make to try and convince Republicans to care about Bush's civil liberties abuses is to say, look, I know you trust George Bush, but imagine Hillary Clinton with these powers. And then when Obama was abusing civil liberties, I used to say to Democrats, I know you love Obama, but imagine Sarah Palin or Newt Gingrich with these powers. And on some level, having Donald Trump inherit this sprawling surveillance apparatus, this incredibly potent, almost unlimited executive branch, from a framework that was constructed jointly by the Republicans and the Democrats in the wake of 9/11, and even before, is the ultimate vindication of that argument. The problem is you can't celebrate the vindication because it means this incredibly dangerous individual is now is in possession of this virtually unlimitless set of authorities and powers that the Republicans and Democrats together built, thinking that only responsible leaders would exercise.
Well, I want to go back to a comment that you made earlier about Russia-U.S. relations and, of course, the specter of possible nuclear war. Now, one of the sites, Lavrov is meeting Trump today in the White House, one of the possible sites of a direct conflict is, of course, in Syria. Now, Russia in particular, backing the Assad regime, but the U.S. as well has carried out something like 8,000 airstrikes in the country. Could you comment on what the situation is in Syria and what you see as the possibility of the U.S. and Russia somehow working together or not?
One of the ironies of this attempt to depict Trump as this puppet of the Kremlin, both generally and then also with regard to Syria, was that President Obama was actually extremely accommodating of Putin and tried to forge a path of better relations with Russia, both generally by doing things like refusing to arm anti-Russian elements in Ukraine. Remember, he mocked Mitt Romney in 2012 for depicting Russia as this grave geopolitical threat. And in Syria, despite some rhetoric about how we needed to remove Assad, the reality is that the U.S. has engaged in this brutal bombing campaign for years, not against Assad, but against many of the elements fighting Assad, particularly al-Qaeda and ISIS. And so there have been times when Obama proposed partnerships with Putin, bombing partnerships where the two countries would work together to bomb agreed-upon targets in Syria. And so for all the talk about Trump's Syria policy being this gift to Vladimir Putin because it bolsters Assad in office, the reality is it's not that much different from what Obama did in Syria or more broadly in trying to have a good relationship with the Kremlin. And remember, Obama never bombed Assad, and Trump did. So it's sort of an irony that it's Trump who gets depicted as having a pro-Russia policy in Syria.
And then moving to Afghanistan, Trump weighing sending thousands more troops, expanding the war in Afghanistan.
You know, it's just such a somber reminder of the fact that while there are huge differences between Republicans and Democrats, ones that matter to huge numbers of people on things like abortion and marriage equality and health care, there are also huge areas of continuity where it makes no difference who ends up winning. And what's so remarkable is the Afghanistan war is now in its 17th year under its third president. Trump is the third president to escalate it after campaigning against it. and we barely ever talk about it anymore.
Well, we're going to keep talking about this after the show, and we're going to post online at democracynow.org. Glenn Greenwald, our guest for the hour, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, founding editor of The Intercept. And that does it for our broadcast. I'll be on the road tonight speaking at Seattle Town Hall in Washington State at 7:30. Then back to New York Friday. I'll be speaking at the New School at Tishman Auditorium on 5th Avenue at 7 p.m. Saturday, I'll be in Olympia, Washington at Capitol Theater at 11. Then at Powell's Books in Cedars Hills Crossing in Beaverton, Oregon. Then I'm off to California, stopping in Eureka, Berkeley, Santa Cruz, Palo Alto, San Diego, Los Angeles, Santa Barbara. Check our website. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.